Hello again, everyone, and welcome to part 2 of the top 10 tech exhibits of the 1939 New York World's Fair. Enjoy! Number 5. A Cosmic Opening. Despite the largely commercial nature of the fair, its organizers still tried to fit in demonstrations of pure science wherever they could. The most memorable of these demonstrations, though not for the reasons the organizers intended, involved the greatest of all celebrity scientists, Albert Einstein. Einstein, frustrated by the fair's lack of actual scientific content, reluctantly agreed to preside over the final opening day ceremony, which would see the fair lit up at night for the first time. After Einstein delivered a speech on cosmic rays, particle detectors at the Hayden Planetarium in Manhattan would capture 10 such rays streaming down from outer space, the arrival of each ray announced by a beam of light on the trilon, and the ringing of an amplified piano wire known as the voice of the perisphere. When the last ray had been captured, Einstein would throw a switch and the entire fairgrounds would be illuminated. This would not only be a milestone for the fair, but also the first large-scale public demonstration of the new technology of fluorescent lighting. But like most everything on that opening day, right from the start, the ceremony went wrong. Einstein had been asked to limit his speech to 5 minutes, a restriction at which the great scientist balked. But after weeks of harassment by the fair's director of illumination, Bassett Jones, he at last relented and trimmed down his speech to a mere 700 words, a length, he lamented, that barely scratched the surface of the subject. Not that there would be many people around to care, for a driving rainstorm had driven off all but a few hardy opening day fairgoers. At 7 p.m. on April 30th, 1939, Einstein was introduced by the fair's president, Grover Whalen, and stepped up to the podium to begin his presentation. Just a few words in, however, the rain-soaked speakers began to crackle with static, drowning out Einstein's already barely comprehensible scientific explanation and his heavily accented English. By the end of his allotted 5 minutes, the handful of assembled spectators were utterly baffled, yet nonetheless excited to be in the presence of such a legendary scientist. At the conclusion of Einstein's speech, the voice of Dr. W. H. Borden from the Hayden Planetarium announced the arrival of the first cosmic rays. As the voice of the perisphere announced the arrival of each ray, spotlight after spotlight climbed the length of the trilon, until finally the entire obelisk was brightly illuminated. Then, when the last ray finally arrived, Einstein threw the power switch and plunged the entire fair into darkness. The electrical system had overloaded, triggering a massive power outage. It was the perfect metaphor for the fair as a whole, promises of science, technology, and a brighter tomorrow, overtaken by encroaching darkness. Number 4. Dairy World of Tomorrow. The fair's theme of progress extended even to the food zone, where major companies showed off the latest in farming and food manufacturing techniques, dramatizing, as the New York Times put it, the story of man's achievement in enlarging diet through science. The displays in the food zone ranged from the high-tech to the bizarrely whimsical. For instance, the Coca-Cola building showed the inner workings of an automated bottling plant, the Kraft building demonstrated the process of pasteurizing Philadelphia cream cheese, while the Continental Baking Company building, shaped like a giant bag of its most famous product, Wonder Bread, featured a full field of wheat out back, which was used to show the farm-to-table journey of a packaged Hostess cake. On the other hand, the Nabisco exhibit featured a specially commissioned Disney animated short called Mickey's Surprise Party, wherein Mickey uses Nabisco products to save the day when Minnie accidentally burns her biscuits, while the Heinz Dome held regular stage show like The Story of Strained Baby Food and The Aristocrat Tomato Man. The Heinz display was particularly popular among children, who coveted the tiny pickle pins the company handed out to visitors. But the food zone's most famous exhibit was the 1-acre electrified farm, which featured a farmhouse, chicken coop, horse shed, and other buildings designed to extol the virtues of electrification on the modern farm. Next door to the electrified farm was the Borden Company's Dairy World of Tomorrow, which featured one of the fair's most memorable displays, the Rotolactor, a giant rotating carousel that automatically washed, dried, and milked up to 50 cows at a time. The direct ancestor of today's automatic milking parlors, the Rotolactor could milk up to 1,680 cows for 12 minutes 3 times a day, producing an astonishing 26,000 quarts of milk. But while such technology had existed for decades, it would not be until the post-war economic boom and a concerted campaign by the U.S. government that the majority of American farms would be electrified and adopt some form of automation. More famous than the rhodolactor itself, however, was one of its regular customers, Elsie the cow, a Jersey heifer selected for her resemblance to Borden's fictional mascot. Elsie became such an icon at the fair that visitor surveys later revealed that 20% of visitors to the Borden exhibit inquired about the rhodolactor, 20% about the location of the bathrooms, and a full 60% about which of the exhibit's 150 cows was Elsie. As its name suggests, the food zone was also the major refreshment area of the fair, featuring 40 sit-down restaurants and 261 food stands. Most international pavilions in the government zone also featured restaurants serving national delicacies. One of the unexpected effects of the outbreak of the Second World War was to strand a large number of restaurateurs from occupied countries in the United States. Among these were Henri Soulet and Pierre Frany of Les Restaurants du Pavillon de France, who in 1941 established three of New York's iconic French restaurants, La Caravelle, La Côte Basque, and Le Pavillon. These and other restaurants founded by World's Fair exiles would help introduce the American people to dozens of international cuisines and change the American culinary landscape forever. Number 3. Westinghouse Time Capsule. One of the fair's indelible contributions to the English lexicon was the term time capsule. While the concept of burying for posterity items representative of a certain time period predates the fair by centuries, the modern term was first coined by Westinghouse for one of the main attractions at its pavilion. The Westinghouse time capsule consisted of a 90-inch long, 9-inch diameter torpedo-shaped container made of a corrosion-resistant copper alloy called cupalloy. Inside was a sealed, nitrogen-filled Pyrex liner filled with over 100 items representing everyday life in the late 1930s, including a fountain pen, light bulb, lady's hat, cigarettes, baseball, $1 in change, a dictionary, a Mickey Mouse watch, and samples of common fabrics, industrial materials, and agricultural seeds. Also included were microfilms containing 1,000 pictures and 10 million words, including works of art like Picasso's Guernica and Dali's Persistence of Memory, full issues of magazines like Harper's and Time, and works of literature like Gone with the Wind, as well as greetings to the future written by such luminaries as Thomas Mann and Albert Einstein. Curiously, in contrast to the fair's optimistic tone, many of these messages were decidedly cynical and pessimistic, with Einstein's reading, "Our time is rich in inventive minds, the inventions of which could facilitate our lives considerably. We are crossing the seas by power, and utilize power also in order to relieve humanity from all tiring muscular work. We have learned to fly, and we are able to send messages and news without any difficulty over the entire world through electric waves. However, the production and distribution of commodities is entirely unorganized, so that everyone must live in fear of being eliminated from the economic cycle, in this way suffering for the want of everything. Furthermore, people living in different countries kill each other at irregular time intervals, so that also for this reason, anyone who thinks about the future must live in fear and terror. This is due to the fact that the intelligence and character of the masses are incomparably lower than the intelligence and character of the few who produce something valuable for the community. I trust that posterity will read these statements with a feeling of proud and justified superiority." At noon on September 23, 1938, the precise moment of the autumnal equinox, the sealed capsule was lowered into a 50-foot deep concrete-lined shaft sunk into the ground beneath the Westinghouse Pavilion. During the fair, the top of the shaft was left open with a viewing window to allow visitors to peer inside, while a cutaway replica and display cases displayed the contents and packing arrangement of the capsule. The capsule was not to be opened until the year 6939, 5,000 years in the future, as stated by the inscription engraved on its surface. Time capsule of cupalloy deposited on the site of the New York World's Fair on September 23, 1938, by the Westinghouse Electric and Manufacturing Company. If anyone should come upon this capsule before the year AD 6939, let him not wantonly disturb it, for to do so would be to deprive the people of that era of the legacy here left them. Cherish it, therefore, in a safe place. To ensure that the capsule would not be forgotten, a book of record was printed listing its contents and location, as well as planetary positions and other astronomical data from the day it was buried. Copies of the book were distributed to over 3,000 museums, libraries, monasteries, and other repositories worldwide, in the hope that at least a few would survive the intervening 5 millennia. As human languages are expected to change dramatically over this period, the book also includes instructions that are to be translated into new languages as they emerge, as well as a detailed guide to the pronunciation of modern English, including a map of where various sounds are produced in the mouth. These efforts presage later attempts at exocommunication, like the Pioneer plaque and the Voyager Golden Record. The 1939 time capsule, along with a similar version built for the 1964 World's Fair, still lies beneath Flushing Meadows Corona Park, their locations marked by a cylindrical granite marker. This, along with the New York City building, which now houses the Queen's Museum, are the only visible remnants of the original 1939 fair. Number 2. Television. The television age is generally regarded as beginning in the 1950s, but had it not been for the Great Depression and the Second World War, the technology might have caught on even earlier. The first working television was demonstrated in 1926 by Scottish inventor John Logie Baird, while the first experimental programs were broadcast by the BBC starting in 1929. Baird's television was a mechanical system, using spinning perforated plates called Nipkow discs to both scan and rebuild the image. While the BBC would continue to broadcast mechanical television programs until 1935, the service was eventually abandoned for a variety of reasons, including low television set ownership, a fire at the studio, and the bulk and unreliability of the Baird system. Practical television was only made possible by the development of completely electronic systems, as pioneered by American inventor Philo Farnsworth and Russian inventor Vladimir Zworykin. These systems were based on cathode ray tubes, which used a scanning electron beam to encode and decode the transmitted image. The first electronic closed-circuit television broadcasts were made in 1936 during the Berlin Summer Olympics, while the first true live broadcast, of King George VI laying a wreath at the Cenotaph in London, was made by the BBC on November 11, 1937. American broadcast television was slower to take off, largely due to a bitter patent war between Farnsworth, Zworykin, RCA, and other competitors. When these disputes were finally settled in 1939, the president of RCA, David Sarnoff, made the decision to launch commercial television at the New York World's Fair. On April 30, 1939, NBC, RCA's broadcast division, broadcast President Franklin D. Roosevelt officially opening the fair. This was the first televised presidential address and the first major television news broadcast in American history. It was also a major logistical challenge, the signals from RCA's cameras having to be transmitted to its mobile television vans and then to a transmitter atop the Empire State Building to be broadcast. In RCA's pavilion, which from the air resembled a giant vacuum tube, fairgoers could visit the Hall of Television, which featured 13 brand new TRK-12 receivers continuously broadcasting new NBC programming, as well as live footage from around the fairgrounds. Sculpted in the popular streamlined moderne style by industrial designer John Vassos, the sets were of an unusual design, the 3-foot-long cathode ray tube being mounted vertically in the cabinet with an angled mirror to allow the viewer to see the image. As the tiny screen was only 12 inches across, the hall featured an experimental projection receiver, which used a lens to magnify and project the image from a television tube onto a 3x4-foot screen. Also on display was the Phantom Teleceiver, a TRK-12 set with a transparent lucite cabinet that assured viewers that no trickery was involved in the device's operation. To show visitors how the new technology would fit into their everyday lives, John Vassos also designed a radio living room of tomorrow, which featured a combination of radio, television, phonograph, and an early fax machine. Cameras are also set up outside the pavilion to allow visitors to see themselves on television. So novel was the experience, special "I was televised" souvenir cards were even handed out. Other companies also displayed televisions at the fair, including Allen B. Dumont Laboratories, Westinghouse, and General Electric, with several building studios in their pavilions to broadcast live interviews with visitors and celebrities. General Motors also displayed an early videophone system, while Ford installed television receivers in its executive lounge. All these companies hoped the fair would help launch a national television craze, but it was not to be. Retailing at between $200 and $600, early television sets were out of reach for the average Depression-era American, and sales over the next 2 years were disappointing. The final nail in the coffin was the outbreak of the Second World War, which delayed the true debut of commercial broadcast television until the end of the conflict. Yet despite this inauspicious start, it is undeniable that the age of television in America began at the 1939 World's Fair. Number 1. Futurama. While the immortal symbol of the fair was the Trilon and Perisphere, its defining exhibit was General Motors' Futurama. Conceived by industrial designer Norman Bell Geddes, Futurama was one of the most ambitious fair attractions ever built, designed to give visitors a spectacular glimpse of America 20 years in the future. Every detail of the attraction was meticulously designed to inspire awe and complete immersion. Visitors entered the Futurama through a tall, narrow cleft in the building's stark white facade, flanked by the giant letters GM. Down a long staircase, they descended into a dimly lit 60-foot-tall chamber, where a 60 by 100-foot map of the United States slowly floated into view. As lights representing major cities, waterways, and roads blinked on across the map, a pre-recorded voice explained the problems of traffic congestion plaguing America, and how modern measures, like the construction of high-speed automated freeways, would alleviate these ills. Then the visitors stepped 2 by 2 onto a series of 552 lushly upholstered wing seats mounted on a track, which whisked them away into the attraction proper. The ride, which Geddes likened to a magic carpet, was designed to give the illusion of sitting in an aircraft flying low over the American landscape in the year 1960. This was accomplished via a massive 36,000 square foot diorama which included more than 500,000 individually designed buildings, 1 million trees, and 50,000 cars, 10,000 of which were animated to drive continuously along tiny 14-lane superhighways. Geddes' utopian vision was phenomenally detailed, featuring modern automated farms, glass-domed orchards, helipads for personal autogyros, futuristic cars that automatically kept their distance using radio beams, flying aircraft, flowing rivers and waterfalls, low-flying clouds, factories, amusement parks, and even country clubs, but not, as early visitors were quick to point out, churches, an oversight Geddes was forced to quickly correct. And as the visitors soared along at 120 feet per minute, the voice of Edgar Barrier of Orson Welles' Mercury Theatre floated through speakers built into the upholstery. Now we have arrived in the wonder world of 1960. Sunshine, trees, farms, hills and valleys, flowers and flowing streams. The world of tomorrow is a thing of beauty. But man has forged ahead since 1939. New and better things have sprung from his industry and genius. Here we see one of our 1960 express motorways. Directly ahead is a modern experimental farm and dairy. Note the terraced fields and strip planting. The fruit trees bear abundantly under individual glass housings. Strange? Fantastic? Unbelievable? Remember, this is the world of 1960. Though commonplace in theme park dark rides today, the Futurama's sound system was a technological marvel for its time. Known as the Polyradar, the device consisted of a 20-ton rotating drum 8 feet in diameter, electrically synchronized to the motion of the track. The 14-minute soundtrack was divided into 22 segments of 39 seconds each segment being recorded onto the audio track of a piece of cinema film wrapped around the drum. As the drum rotated, each loop of film was carried past a set of optical scanners, the output of which was wired to one of 22 separate sections of the track. As each pair of chairs reached a particular section of track, a set of electrical pickups wired to the built-in speakers would connect to the appropriate segment of soundtrack for that part of the diorama. This, along with soundproofing to prevent noise interference between seats, allowed visitors to hear a continuous narration synchronized to the view outside, regardless of variations in the track's speed. But this wasn't Futurama's only trick. Through continuous changes in the diorama's scale and strategically placed rises and falls in the track, Geddes created the illusion of flying at different altitudes. As the ride neared its end, the buildings of a looming metropolis grew larger and larger, until the visitors found themselves floating over a four-cornered urban intersection featuring an apartment block, a grocery store, and a GM dealership. Suddenly, the chairs emerged into a full-size reproduction of that same intersection, producing an effect many visitors likened to being shrunk down and placed inside the diorama. Disembarking from their seats, the visitors were free to wander about this intersection of tomorrow and peruse GM's latest automotive products, including the striking Pontiac Ghost car with a body made entirely out of transparent plexiglass. On their way out of the exhibit, visitors were handed a blue and white pin emblazoned with the words, "I have seen the future." The Futurama was by far the most popular and well-regarded attraction of the fair, with 47.5% of survey respondents listing it as the exhibit they would most like to visit again, compared to a mere 7.3% for distant second-place winner, General Electric. The ride operated at its maximum capacity of 30,000 people nearly every day of the fair, with more than 10 million people experiencing GM's vision of the future. The ride was so influential and well remembered that an updated version was created by GM for the 1964 World's Fair 25 years later. Yet for all its immersive, high-tech visual wizardry and deft combination of showmanship and corporate promotion, perhaps the most remarkable aspect of Futurama is how mundane and attainable its vision of the future was. While its 1964 successor promised vacation resorts on the moon, the main technology promoted by the original Futurama, high-speed, multi-lane controlled access highways, were perfectly feasible in the 1930s. They only required sufficient funding and political will to realize. Indeed, in 1944, Geddes was invited by President Roosevelt to consult on the Federal Aid Highway Act, which laid the groundwork for the interstate highway system that ultimately realized Geddes' vision. Unusually for a futurist, Geddes actually underestimated the post-war growth of automobile usage. While he predicted that in 20 years Americans would own 38 million cars, in actuality, by 1960 there were more than 74 million cars on the road. Ultimately, the Futurama represented a microcosm of the fair itself. While its futuristic predictions were relatively tame by modern standards, the 1939 New York World's Fair is unique in that within 20 years, most of them had actually come true. I hope you enjoyed this rather different video format. I sure enjoyed putting it together. If you'd like to learn a little bit more about the 1939 New York World's Fair, how it originated, how it was organized, some of the exhibits on display, and some of the key events during its 2 seasons, I would highly recommend Twilight at the World of Tomorrow by James Morrow. This is what got me interested in the 39 Fair, and it's just an excellent piece of narrative nonfiction, highly recommended. Anyway, that's all I have for you today. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Jean Messi, and I'll see you next time on another video on our own devices. Until then, have a great day.